Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into something we've all felt at some point, that extreme vulnerability of being a kid. We're going to break down the source material of 3 absolutely chilling but very real childhood horror stories. You know, these aren't your run-of-the-mill campfire ghost stories. No, these are grounded, real-life accounts of intense psychological and physical terror that left literal, lifelong scars on the people who lived through them. I want you to just think about this for a second. What actually happens when your childhood nightmares turn out to be real? When we're kids, we totally rely on adults to validate our reality, right? We count on them to look under the bed and tell us, hey, it's just a shadow. But as we'll see in the 3 cases we're unpacking today, that safety net completely unravels. The monsters, they were really there, and the evidence was staring everyone right in the face. Okay, let's jump right into case study 1, the creepy roommate, the psychological terror of the known. So our source material kicks things off with a 13-year-old kid, an 8th grader at a suburban boarding school. He gets randomly paired up with a roommate named Weston. At first, it's just that typical awkwardness of sharing a tiny room in a closet with a total stranger. But then, completely out of the blue, Weston hands our narrator a folded piece of paper. It's a list of banned items for the dorm. And the rules? No frogs, no salt. I mean, the sheer absurdity of that is just wild. The narrator didn't even have frogs, wouldn't have a clue where to find one, and who brings a salt shaker into a dorm anyway? But here's the kicker. It wasn't a joke. Weston was dead serious. He had absolutely no sense of humor. Right off the bat, he's establishing this deeply unpredictable, incredibly bizarre vibe in the room.
And things escalate fast. Weston starts constantly whispering to himself in the pitch dark. At one point, the narrator even finds a secret notebook stashed under Weston's mattress. And what's inside? A list of classmates' names, including his own. Talk about nightmare fuel. So naturally, the paranoia sets in. Fast forward to about week 3. The narrator wakes up in the dead of night. As his eyes adjust to the dark, he realizes Weston isn't in his bed. He's standing right over the narrator's bed, just frozen there, smiling down at him in the dark. Naturally, the narrator screams his lungs out. But Weston doesn't even flinch. He just calmly claims the narrator was sleep-talking and crawls back into bed. Imagine trying to sleep in that room again.
Well, week 4 rolls around and the narrator walks into the room to find a live garden snake just chilling on his bed. When he confronts Weston about it, Weston brushes it off as a prank. But when the narrator asks, "Where on earth did you even find a wild snake?" Weston looks genuinely confused. He just looks at him and says, "What do you mean? They're everywhere." It gets weirder. Weston opens a jar on his desk, and this wild snake willingly slithers right inside, almost like it wanted to be caught. The narrator is just young and terrified, so he doesn't even report it. He's just too scared of what Weston might do. Which brings us to the absolutely horrifying climax of this first case. The narrator experiences what he thinks is just a classic case of sleep paralysis. He's stuck in bed, completely paralyzed, staring at this dark, pulsing mass swirling up on the ceiling. Then this claw emerges. It reaches down and violently scratches the wooden frame of his bed. All of a sudden, this entity just goes crazy. It recoils and flies straight into the closed window. The glass shatters loudly and bam, the narrator's eyes snap wide open. Now, normally you wake up from a nightmare and you're safe, right? Not this time. Shards of glass are literally falling onto the floor. The room is completely trashed, exactly like it was in the dream, and when he checks the bed frame, those deep physical scratch marks from the claw are actually there. Panicking, he shakes Weston awake, totally expecting to blame his crazy roommate for tearing up the room, but instead, Weston wakes up, points the finger right back at the narrator, and then starts violently hissing like a cat and screaming in some totally unrecognizable foreign language. The school evacuates the narrator immediately, and Weston is just gone the very next day. The absolute terrifying reality here. That window was smashed from the inside out. Whatever he saw in that room, it wasn't just a bad dream. Moving right along to case study 2, the unseen farm intruder, the terror of the physical unknown. So for this one, we're trading a cramped dorm room for total rural isolation. Picture a childhood summer spent out on a 40-acre Pennsylvania farm, completely surrounded by thick, dense woods. Our narrator is staying up on the 3rd floor, this solitary, finished attic room. During his 2nd summer there, things start getting weird, but subtly at first. He hears soft footsteps creeping up the attic stairs. He watches his bedroom door handle slowly turn, and the door creeps open about 6 inches. Trying to cope, he just flicks off his flashlight and pretends to be asleep. He's desperately telling himself, "It's fine. It's just my elderly grandmother checking on me." But then it ramps up. He starts waking up to his bed physically shaking, and he can see the dark outline of a silent figure just standing at the foot of his bed. Next morning, his closet door, which he knows he closed, is wide open. And of course, his parents just brush it all off as an overactive imagination in an old, creaky house. Okay, fast forward years later. The narrator is at a family funeral, and he brings up this old grandmother checking in theory to his cousin, Francisco. Now, Francisco used to stay in that exact same attic room, but Francisco's experience, it was wildly different. It was violently invasive. It was predatory. While the narrator dealt with a shaking bed and being watched, Francisco actually felt his mattress sink under someone's weight. He felt rough hands physically tracing the features of his face in the pitch black and literally grabbing his wrist. This wasn't some ghost story, guys. This was a horrifying violation of a kid's physical safety. Francisco's response completely shattered any innocent theories the narrator had left. He said, "That's nothing. That thing used to touch me." He knew right away it wasn't their grandmother. How? Because the hands grabbing him in the dark were rough and scratchy, like a man's hands. Francisco had actually told his mom about it, but he was just ignored and scolded. So, summer after summer, he just had to lie there, keep his eyes squeezed shut, and endure it in total silence. So, let's think about this. If we completely cross the grandmother off the list, we are left with a seriously staggering and deeply disturbing reality. If this wasn't supernatural, that means an unknown, predatory intruder was secretly living somewhere inside that isolated farmhouse, just waiting for the sun to go down to prey on the kids. Let that sink in. All right, let's look at our final story. Case Study 3, The Girl in the Window. The tragic, lingering terror of the supernatural. This one centers around a 9-year-old girl living in a really narrow townhouse. Her third-floor bedroom window looks directly across this tight 20-foot gap straight into the back window of the neighboring house. And for months, this totally innocent routine plays out. Every single day, right at 3:30 p.m., a little girl with dark hair and a bright yellow sweater pops up in that opposite window. They wave. They play little guessing games with drawings. Whenever our narrator opens her window to try and talk, the girl just smiles and taps her ear, basically signaling she can't hear through the glass. After about an hour or so, she's gone. The narrator's mom totally dismisses the whole thing, swearing up and down that an older couple, the Murphys, live there and they definitely don't have kids. But then, the whole situation takes a massive, terrifying left turn. We go from innocent afternoon playdates to late-night desperation. Completely out of nowhere, the narrator gets woken up at 2 a.m. by tapping on the glass. She looks across the gap, and there's the girl in the yellow sweater. But she's not smiling anymore. She's got her hands clasped together, literally begging. After that night, she completely vanishes for 3 days. Nothing. Then, on the 5th night, boom, she's back at 2 a.m. This time, she's violently pressing her hands against the glass, and she's desperately mouthing the words, "Help me." And this right here, this is the exact moment where the laws of physics just completely break down. The neighbor's window was shut tight, yet as the girl mouthed "help me," her breath heavily fogged up the glass. Guys, it was a warm night in the middle of May. A closed window at room temperature simply does not fog up like that. And right as that condensation appeared, the narrator saw it. A massive, dark stain slowly blossoming right down the front of the girl's yellow sweater. Absolutely terrified, the narrator runs to wake her parents. But of course, by the time they get to the room, the window across the way is completely empty. But the aftermath? It proves the adults knew exactly what was happening the whole time. The very next day, the narrator casually asks Mrs. Murphy about the little girl. Mrs. Murphy instantly drops her smile, drops her watering can, and practically barks at the kid to go inside. That same night, the narrator's parents secretly drag her bed to the other side of the room and bolt up these thick, heavy curtains over the window. The mom strictly forbids any more games with the imaginary friend. They were actively silencing their own child to keep a terrifying neighborhood secret buried. It actually wasn't until high school that the narrator finally learned the truth. Her mother sat her down and confessed what Mrs. Murphy had told her all those years ago. The people who owned that house before the Murphys had an 11-year-old daughter. Her name was Jenna. Tragically, she was hit by a car right in front of the house, right after school let out at exactly 3:30 p.m. And on that fatal day, she was wearing a yellow sweater. The Murphys had actually sealed off that third-floor room completely because of all the bizarre supernatural things happening inside it. And that brings us to lingering shadows of youth, synthesizing the trauma of childhood horror. We've looked at 3 wildly different stories today: a deeply disturbed roommate, a physical intruder in the dark, and a tragic apparition. But the trauma they caused, it all links up perfectly. The true horror here isn't just about what these kids actually saw. It's the absolute, crushing isolation of experiencing undeniable terror, only to have the adults in the room look you in the eye and say, it's all in your head. So why do these childhood horrors stick with us so vividly as we grow up? Well, looking at the breakdown, 40% of that lingering trauma stems straight from a lack of adult validation, being told you're crazy when you know for a fact you aren't. 30% comes from the sheer inability to rationalize what happened, like impossible breath fogging up a closed window on a warm night. And the last 30%? That's the physical evidence left behind, the shattered glass, the open closet door, the deep scratch marks on the bed. That's exactly why the narrator from our last story, even now as a 34-year-old adult, flat out refuses to live anywhere with windows facing other buildings and deals with a serious phobia of mirrors and reflective surfaces. The human mind just cannot let go of unvalidated trauma. So I want you to think back to those weird, unexplainable things you saw in the dark when you were a kid. The bumps in the night your parents promised were just shadows, or maybe raccoons, or just a bad dream. Are your unexplainable childhood memories really just your imagination going wild, or was it something else entirely? Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this explainer. Keep your eyes open, and I will see you next time as we unpack another fascinating topic.